the reality is you're probably not going to be able to collect everything from the tenant, either because you don't want to go sue the tenant. Texas is the worst state that I'm aware of to collect from deadbeats, the worst state in the United States. The joke about this is that Texas, of course, was not part of the Union in its early going, and they would write on bills in the rest of the United States, GTT, gone to Texas, because if the people moved here to escape their debts, they would not have, they couldn't collect them down here. So the rumor is that the reason Davy Crockett, who had been a congressman in his home state, had moved to Texas was to escape his creditors, by the way. So we have a very famous historical example. Of course, you saw that turned out for him, but at the Alamo. But it is important to understand that you will almost always absorb some of that yourselves. And in terms of if you've got a really bad experience, about the best you can do working with some of the landlord reference services is to provide them a bad reference, so that if people are checking these people out, they will make it harder for them to get a property in the future. Also, if you have a very substantial problem, you can file a small claims court lawsuit against them. They will probably no-show. You'll take a default judgment. The judgment can be perfected, meaning it can be filed over at the courthouse and becomes a permanent record in that county. If people check lien records, that doesn't turn into garnishment, but that debt will show up as against their credit, and so it can make it difficult for them to get credit in the future. And so there are things you can do, but again, we're usually not going to worry about that unless something very extreme happens. So if you're looking at an $800 or $1,000 that the security deposit didn't cover, most of us landlords are writing that off. You know, again, it's part of your expenses of doing business, but you know, don't look, even if you've got great legal help and great real estate agents and stuff and managers, it's just the nature of the beast. And that's again why you want to reduce turnover by having long-term tenants in there, because it tends to be part of the friction of what's happening. You need to be careful because you can also be sued for defamation. Now again, your umbrella policy should protect you from that if that happens, but you probably have a deductible and it's no fun to get sued. So if you do make statements about a prior tenant, be prepared to back it up, where you sent letters to the tenant saying, hey, we didn't get April's rent, we didn't get May's rent, and you know, you're out of here in June. And then you tell a new landlord that, and then they come up with one of these bogus lawsuits claiming that, you know, that you defamed them, and it's like, hey, here's the records, you know, where's those checks for paying April and May's rent? Well, they're not there. So there's a cliche, truth is a complete defense, so you want to make sure that you're real careful. The other thing that I've been put in an unfortunate position, if they're still in your property and you are desperate to get them out, you need to be careful not to give them a false positive reference so that they will move, because the next landlord may come back and say, you know, you lied to me, you defrauded me because you told me this guy was current on his rent and he wasn't, and we found out after he went, you know, south on our rent, and they're looking for somebody to fuss at. I don't know that that's a cognizable legal action, but I can tell you it won't be your best day and all that.
I'd like to know, excuse me, how we can protect each other, because when somebody submits an application here, we run the credit, we run the criminal background, and I go steps further in that I call the last landlord that they had and say, hey, listen, you know, how is this person paying? If I get kind of an iffy comment from them, I ask for a letter stating that they paid their rent on time. But I know that people still slip through the cracks. So how can our owners, as responsible owners, protect the next person from somebody who's a bad tenant without doing the defamation, going the defamation route?
Well, again, anything that's true is true, and there are various credit checking services that specialize for landlords. And you can report truthful information. You can say, you know, Billy Bob moved out. At the time he moved out, he owed 2 months' rent. There were dog droppings all over the backyard. There was cat urine odor in 2 rooms of the house. And his security deposit didn't cover the lost rent, much less the cleanup that we had to do on the house. And you would have receipts, that landlord will have receipts from paying, you know, some people, landscape people clean up the backyard. Other people come in and repaint the house with odor treatment and then painting and things like that. Like I said, I've been through all of this at some point, so I know I've got the receipts to show it. But that's probably the single best method. And if a new landlord does call you, usually you can kind of talk in code. You can kind of say, well, yeah, Billy Bob's ready to move, and you know, but you have to be careful. You know, if they say, well, did he pay all the rent in time? You can't say yes, because they didn't pay all the rent in time, and you're just magnifying the problem. And Billy Bob has to pack up and go find a landlord who doesn't check references, or go live at home with mom and dad again. So be it. But and again, it's tempting to give a false reference to get them out of the house, but I would be real careful about that, and because it doesn't help us clean up the rental market. Because there are people who are serial bad tenants, and they get away with it by going around. You're nodding your head, so you've been there. And I've had a serial bad tenant. The guy told a great story. We decided to take a risk on him, extend credit to him, and we eventually didn't lose any money. He actually paid all of his rent, and but he ended up moving out of our place, one of my apartments, into his sister's house or something like that. So he was definitely not on board. And the other thing is to check employment, because usually people with good risk as tenants have a solid employment record, and that's one of the things that I look at. So 2 things I look at most closely are the most immediate landlord and their employment reference, and make sure they actually work where they say they're working, and that they actually make the amount of money. Now, a little trick on that is a lot of stuff's being done electronically today. I'm finding a lot of apartment complexes and landlords will not give references without a hard copy. So when I send out a tenant application, I say, you must sign this and you must return it to me, because I need to be able to fax, still out there, folks, fax or email that to the representative to get that reference from that previous landlord. So it's a little cumbersome, but the good old-fashioned signature is still out there.
What's with respect to deposits, what would you say is the minimum loss on a repair or something like that before you go into proceedings on like filing small claims or you know, taking it to that level?
Well, first of all, it's up to the individual owner. So for the rental management company, we do what they want us to do. I would say most of our owners, I don't think we've had anybody tell us to sue somebody for if they went past security deposit. We had somebody
not lawsuit, but definitely sending to collections.
Oh, yeah, okay, so turn it over to an attorney that sends the attorney demand letter, and sometimes that shakes people up. But
because there's a cost involved in putting all that forward.
In my own case,
there's usually, like I would say, a percentage above the deposit that,
absolutely,
you know, it's worthwhile at that point.
I wrote off about $2,000 recently on property. So, and I know it sounds funny to say I'm an attorney and a broker and I wrote off $2,000. Some days it's just not worth it. And we did pretty well on the property. And what happens is when you do a change out on a longer term tenant, if you're smart, you're probably going to paint the whole house. The tenant is going to blow back at you. You can say legitimately, look, you're in there 4 years, you had a dog, you had kids, the whole house needs to be repainted. You are never going to sell that in small claims court. So, you know, we took about a $2,000 loss, but I didn't feel like we were going to be successful arguing that, and I felt like when you sort out what might be considered normal wear and tear versus the damage to the property, it's just hard to sort out. So it's a judgment call, but I would say $1,000, certainly $800 to $1,000, it's worth having attorney demand letters sent out.